My name is Deandra Coleman, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia SBDC is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 27 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses and their local communities. Our one-on-one consulting services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Supply Chain Impacts and Considerations, is presented by the Alexandria SBDC and hosted by the Virginia SBDC Network. Keep an eye out for the next webinar in this series, which will be announced shortly, and as well the Alexandria SBDC's upcoming webinars on EVA registration and SWAM certification on July 16th and July 23rd. We are recording today's presentation. It will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted, but if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. If we're unable to get to your question, you can email us after the webinar. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today's session. We do have two. Chris Van Orden is the manager of the Craft Beverage Assistance and International Business Development Programs at the Virginia SBDC. Through the IBD program, Chris assists Virginia companies looking to access foreign markets by providing no-cost counseling, training, and research. Kathy O'Keefe, our second presenter, has a long history of assisting entrepreneurs, well-established companies, and government agencies with their international logistics needs. Her company, Export Consulting Services, LLC, develops personalized transportation solutions and training to facilitate successful exporting. Please join me in welcoming Chris and Kathy.
All right, thanks so much, Deandra. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this discussion about strategies to make your supply chain more resilient. As Deandra mentioned, my name is Chris Van Orden, and I'm the manager of the Virginia SBDC's International Business Development and Craft Beverage Assistance Program. When I say International Business Development, I'm going to say IBD. I'm joined by my colleague, Kathy O'Keefe, who will be sharing some insights gained from decades of experience as a freight forwarder, as well as a snapshot of some current supply chain issues. Next slide, please. So before we dig in, a bit of background on the IBD program. We're a statewide program based out of the Virginia SBDC state office, meaning that we serve companies throughout the Commonwealth and support the work of our regional centers, like the Alexandria SBDC, who organized this great series. In addition to myself, the IBD program consists of Director Aaron Miller and Senior International Trade Specialist Dulcie Zahnizer. Together, we have over 40 years of experience in international trade. We support businesses on a wide range of trade issues, including finance, compliance, marketing, and more. And we have close ties to our host and partner organizations, George Mason University, Virginia Economic Development Partnership, the U.S. Commercial Service, the Export-Import Bank, Small Business Administration, Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and many more. So we make sure that any companies that we work with are able to access all available resources. We also have a team of student researchers who can provide tailored, in-depth research for eligible Virginia businesses. If you're interested in accessing Virginia IBD services, you can learn more through the Virginia SBDC website. I've also listed my contact information at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So today we're going to be speaking about some strategies to make your supply chain more resilient. First, quickly, we'll define what a supply chain is. There are multiple ways to frame the concept. You could think of a supply chain as a connected system of organizations, activities, information, and resources designed to source, produce, and move goods from origination to a final destination, typically from a supplier all the way through to an end customer. You could also think of a supply chain as all of the elements that go into a product's end retail cost. If you add up all of these expenses required to make a product sellable, you have a sense of what makes a supply chain. Now, however you choose to think of the concept, it's important to have a plan in place for managing your supply chain. These arrangements don't just happen. They're the accumulation of dozens of decisions, so why not be intentional, especially before you encounter issues? So today there are all kinds of disruptions to contend with. COVID-related issues, trade tensions, externalities like the Suez Canal blockage, like you see there, as well as other longer-term concerns. My colleague, Kathy, will be speaking to you on some of these in just a moment, but I'll say that being actively engaged with your supply chain can help you to deal with many of these concerns and may differentiate you from your competitors. It's important to be upfront that many of these strategies require time and/or money. That's just the way things are. Typically, supply chains are designed to achieve the lowest possible price, but the problem with that way of thinking is that they don't quantify risk. When you start to put a dollar value on the impact of supply chain disruptions, whether they're moderate delays or wholesale failures, you can see how small investments in resilience can pay dividends on the back end. So managing your supply chain involves all kinds of decisions, large and small, including daily considerations. Kathy, I believe you've recently made some real world supply chain decisions when it comes to flooring.
Yeah, I was trying to find flooring at Home Depot, and they're out of like 8 different colors. So that made my decision on which one I was going to choose, because I knew already it was going to be months before they get it back in.
Yeah, and Kathy knows what those out of stocks mean now and how much longer these disruptions last. So that's that kind of daily thinking is the type of thinking that we're talking about here. So before we dig in on how to build more resilient supply chains, I've asked Kathy to share a snapshot of how some supply chains are being impacted at the moment. It's important to be honest about what's happening in the global economy, but don't let these conditions get you down. Don't be discouraged. We're going to be covering some of the strategies to deal with these disruptions. So Kathy, I'll turn it to you. Next slide, please.
So Chris has had me do the doom and gloom first, and he'll be the optimist at the second part. Next slide. I'm gonna give you the worst of it. I'm sure people became more aware of the supply chain during the Suez Canal situation with the ship stuck there, and we're also finding out when we're ordering things online that they're out of everything. There's a reason. Because Americans, especially, and Europeans as well, and people around the world, were stuck at home, we changed our buying patterns. As you all know, we're buying stuff more for the home office, exercise equipment, kitchen equipment, TVs, all types of things that we may have put off to purchase. It's all being done at once. The problem is the demand is there, plus the containers, when the pandemic came, the ships were taken out of service all around the world. Containers piled up in different spots and not in the right places either. You might hear about a shortage of containers. That's one of the biggest struggles, believe it or not. There's about 25 million containers out there, but believe it or not, it's not enough. So we're trying to get containers to shippers and exporters. And also, you've probably heard about some of the shipping lines are sending out ships completely with empty containers. They're bypassing book freight altogether because the pricing is better on the ships coming out of China. Everyone's complaining to the FMC, Federal Maritime Commission, Department of Commerce. Task force are being organized, but we all know what that means. Probably nothing will be done. Problem is most of these shipping lines are foreign owned, so there's not a lot of control over them. But right now you'll see, if you've ever driven up to the beach or whatever, you'll see a lot of ships anchored off the Bay Bridge in the Chesapeake Bay waiting to get into Philadelphia. Right now off the West Coast, it's 5 days to get into port. Sometimes 12 days in the New York ports. So what happens is, you can imagine, it's sort of a rolling delay. You can't get the ship in, you can't get the containers off, which means that if you're booked for that ship going outbound, you could be rolled for 2 or 3 weeks. If I could have the next slide. And I might say the European Union has about a 6-week delay now in bookings. Well, the good news is all the carriers have ordered thousands of new ocean containers, but the bad news is they're made in China. So, which means we already have a log jam in China. So it's going to take a while to get these containers out to everyone. So what's happening in the meantime? The pricing. What used to cost about $3,900 can be as much as $20,000 right now. And you might say, well, why not use air freight? Well, and I think most of you are aware, about half the fleet around the world is still grounded because of the restrictions of the pandemic. So there's less planes on the schedule. So we all know what that means. Higher demand. Pricing is extremely high on air freight right now. And to add more dilemmas to our freight forwarding community. The Panama Canal is experiencing a drought, which translates to lower water levels in the canal, which means less weight on the transiting ships. Chicago is totally jammed. There's a 4-week delay at the railhead at Chicago. As these containers come off the ships in the West Coast, they go on the rail to Chicago, and then they're connect to various cities around the country. And they just can't get them on the railroads are completely full. So a lot of people are making some big profits. The shipping lines are doing quite well. They're making record profits right now. They're also ordering more ships, so there will be more ships coming as well. But again, we know it takes quite a long time to build a ship. And you may have heard about the shortage of truckers. We have 80,000 less truckers this year than last year, and we were already shorthanded. So, and they're also restricted on how many hours a day they can be on the road. So often a trucker, say in the Port of Baltimore, he'll wait all day to pick up one container. Back in the old days, he might be able to do 2 or 3 runs to the port. And if you want to get a trucker, they're booked to the end of July, and this is only June right now. So you can see it is it's what people in the industry are calling is a complete meltdown. If I could have the next slide, please. So when is this all going to get better? Well, the experts are predicting the first quarter of 23, which sounds like a long way off right now. And it might be too optimistic, we're not sure. But there are things being done, as we mentioned. There's more containers being built, more ships being built. And also people might ease up on that exercise equipment, right? Once the restaurants are open and people can travel again. There may be a leveling off on the demand on the home products, technological products. Chinese New Year, why is that important? It used to be the most important date on my calendar when I was a freight forwarder, because China does shut down completely during their New Year, which begins in February. What they think might happen is we might be able to catch a breath for a while and catch up. Some of the ships and the containers will catch up to the demand. It'll alleviate the congestion for a couple of weeks, because it'll stretch to 6 weeks. Many of the workers in China do not go back to the factories after they're home, or they take extra time to get back. So it does stretch to about a 6-week period. It's now cheaper to source in the United States, but many goods are no longer made here. So, I mean, we used to make all of our own appliances too, actually recently. GE, Westinghouse all made their appliances here in the US or North America, but they've moved all their products to Asia, most of them. So that's one of the problems. It's hard to rebalance this situation. But I think Chris will give us some reasons for hope. He's the optimist today. I'm going to turn it over to the optimist now.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Next slide, please. I appreciate all of that context, Kathy. I know that we want to be very clear about what's happening in the wider world. There are lots of issues to contend with, which makes it all the more important to take concrete steps to refine your supply chain. And remember, everyone is facing these issues, so you're not alone. So today we're going to be sharing 8 strategies for enhancing your supply chain's resilience. First, we're going to focus on input management, and specifically inventory buffering. That's the strategy of maintaining sufficient inventory beyond your immediate needs in order to hedge against the possibility of a supply chain interruption. So this runs counter to the Toyota model of just-in-time manufacturing or Motorola's short-cycle manufacturing. That's where inventory is minimized by having inputs delivered just before use. While there are costs associated with buffering, outlays for the inputs themselves, storage costs and warehousing, things like that, it can help to prevent out of stocks due to production shortfalls, or supply chain shortfalls, the inputs not arriving when you need them. And there are opportunities to realize cost savings here. So quantity discounts, smarter ordering could offset some of those upfront volume costs. Kathy, I know that you've seen some just-in-time systems having issues right now. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, because of the air freight, fewer planes in the air and so forth, what they're turning to is more charter aircraft. So there's not a plane available around the world right now. So they're actually chartering entire aircraft because as you mentioned, the just in time is not working right now. They're running out of products, as we know. So that's one of the ways that they're trying to get the product in is actually, I think, as we talked about, Home Depot actually chartered an entire vessel this week, $135,000 a day to charter a vessel from China to the United States. And it takes they'll have that vessel out for about 35 days. So they're taking very extreme measures right now. Companies are pouring a lot of money into it. Peloton just spent $100 million in extra air freight because they couldn't rely on the ocean freight. So that type of thing is what's going on right now.
So you can see how, right, if you need the inputs when you need them, if you have extra inventory on hand, so you're not relying upon taking these drastic measures, that can really help. Next slide, please. Intentional redundancy. So having a number of options for each step in a supply chain allows companies to be adaptive to a wide range of interruptions. So this means both having multiple vendors at each step and sourcing from multiple regions. This multi-sourcing strategy may result in higher costs. Vendors often offer better pricing to customers who opt in for all services, right? It makes sense that the costs go down if you consolidate. But going all in with a given supplier concentrates risk. So if a disruption impacts a region or a popular supplier, everyone using those sources, including your competitors, will be searching for fixes at the same time. That's why companies would be well advised to build their supply chain so that they can pivot quickly as conditions shift, rather than scrambling to find alternatives to suddenly unavailable or cost prohibitive sources. So in the end, companies that practice multi-sourcing are often less impacted in the event of a single link's failure. They just have these alternatives ready at hand. So in your experience, Kathy, how have you seen companies use multi-sourcing to hedge their risk?
Well, I think hitting the sourcing from Canada and Mexico, I've seen companies like a Walmart and something like that have multi-sourcing already in place. There are too many companies that rely strictly on the Asian supply chain. And I think the companies that are well suited are the ones that have already done this. If you're trying to do it now, it's going to be difficult. I would say that.
Yeah,
some companies were a little more forward thinking on this.
Mm-hmm. And concentrating, regionally, exactly. If there's some interruption that is regionally based, having another region to turn to can really help to alleviate that. Next slide, please. Now we're going to be talking about supply chain structure. So first, link reduction. Companies can garner more control over their supply chains by reducing the number and length of the links. Fewer steps means fewer transitions and fewer potential failure points. So each time an input changes hands, there's some risk involved. Customs issues, tariff implications, logistical lead times, just there's transitions to account for. Meanwhile, companies can reduce the length of their supply chain links through some strategies like reshoring, which is sourcing inputs domestically rather than via imports. There's obviously some people who are bringing their factories back to the United States, or nearshoring, which is moving supply chains to physically closer markets, which often have stronger trade relations with the United States. So shorter links have lots of advantages. Companies often have more insight into their supply chains, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. They cut down on the impact of delays. So you can very easily do the math. 50% delay is very different for a 5-day turnaround than a 2-month turnaround. And you can also help to avoid some risks entirely, like foreign exchange risk, customs holdups, some of these other regional issues that we've seen crop up. So again, some of these may come with higher upfront costs. We want to be upfront about that. Sourcing from the US or some other markets that may have a higher upfront cost, but it could be a worthwhile investment to reduce that risk. So if you're quantifying that risk, all of a sudden the numbers seem to be a little bit more appealing. Kathy, what are some of the issues that you've seen with some of these multi-market supply chains?
Well, you have the most important thing is the customs clearance delays. And of course, right now, you might have a delay of a couple of days, but it's turned into several days now for customs clearance. So in addition to the long transit times we're seeing now, we're also adding in, we also jammed on the customs clearance side. Same thing in Europe and Asia. So again, anything that can be done on a nearshoring basis is an advantage, because we're adding time on every time the shipment is moved somewhere, is adding time to it. Delays, I should say, adding delays.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Next slide, please. Now, seeking transparency. So as I've kind of hammered on a little bit here, quantifying and appreciating risk is very important, but it's impossible to do without a full awareness of each step. Long, complex supply chains based primarily in markets into which a company has little insight can break down with very little warning. So it's worth investigating how critical inputs reach you when things are going well to help diagnose issues before they cause serious disruptions. So this kind of proactive learning has additional benefits beyond just, avoiding headaches. Becoming familiar and getting in touch with your suppliers outside of a problem resolution context can have all kinds of benefits. Emphasizing vendor relationships and understanding suppliers' core considerations, you're going to be better positioned to make intelligent adjustments to ordering and logistics. Just being on better terms with suppliers is always a great idea. So it's also aware that if you have a better sense of how your supply chain operates, depending on your capacities and skill sets, a company may even go so far as to take over certain aspects of logistics, increasing control over their process and potentially realizing some cost savings. Companies may decide to do this after they've gotten a good handle on how their supply chain works. So Kathy, you mentioned some ways that opaque supplier relationships have caused some issues.
Yeah, you have always have to keep in close touch with your suppliers overseas, but even more so now. I mean, it has to be hands-on. They're having problems getting raw materials and so forth, and their dates that they give you for the release of the product might not be accurate. These types of things, and also getting them to make bookings on ships and planes and so forth. So you have to manage them much more closely than ever before. So that type of thing, because they're having their own problems in various countries producing these products. So that is the reason for more management of your supply chain. Maybe in the old days you could be hands off, but not now. You have to be very closely. Most of the companies I know are talking to their suppliers on a daily basis right now to get updates.
And Kathy, would you mind also sharing a little bit about how you've seen some companies decide to take over some aspect of their sort of logistical elements of their supply chain?
Well, I think the Peloton thing is a good example. They were not able to let their suppliers take care of the process of getting a product to the US. So Peloton went ahead and took over that process of spending $100 million to get on air freight, which they would never do in a million years normally. They took it over because they couldn't rely on the normal ocean freight that their suppliers were doing. So they actually took it over and are willing to invest that much money into getting the product here to the United States and to Europe. So that's a great example of the company actually taking it over.
Absolutely. And that's a very big issue, right? $100 million managing that entirely. That's maybe not something that all small businesses can relate to, but the same issues happen at the small scale of, arranging sort of the last mile logistics type of things or whatever. Kathy, I'm sure has seen all kinds of interesting arrangements over the years.
Yeah, and if you're not happy with what they're doing, a lot of times they have their friends overseas that they use for logistics, and you might have to oversee that and get them away from their friends and get them to a company that can take care of the product and move it out.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Kathy. Next slide, please. So now we're going to be talking about some downstream considerations, integrating your supply chains. I mean this internally. So companies that isolate their supply chain considerations from production and fulfillment are going to miss out on opportunities for efficiencies and open themselves up to potential interruptions. So open streams of communication within a company help ensure that sales and production are aligned and positioned to respond in tandem to any snags along the way. I know this is something that a lot of companies kind of grow up into, but having that internal mechanism to communicate the sort of demand side, what's happening in the marketplace with their products, and making sure that matches the input stream that they have. So no supply chain will work seamlessly forever, and externalities are going to arise. Again, that's those first couple of slides that we discussed really kind of made that clear. But you can control what happens within your own company and have contingency plans in place to deal with these disruptions, making sure that the sales side of the sort of fulfillment sales side is going to match what's happening on the input side. Because otherwise there are definitely opportunities for some disruptions, some delays to happen here. Kathy, I believe that you have a kind of a somewhat of a comical version of seeing this happen, where in the sort of logistics and loading dock situations of upstream and downstream clashing.
Yeah, I mean, any company only has so many dock space for incoming or outgoing containers. And if you don't have a good warehouse manager, the time is money, because if you have a trucker waiting off site to get onto your property to offload, even a small company, time is money right now. They will charge you for every hour they sit. So, and that is where and sometimes you can have your own jam outside your warehouse and trying to get your product out at the same time. So it has become a nightmare for, even as I mentioned, medium-sized and small companies trying to oversee their warehouse situation, because they can't plan anymore. That sometimes the containers just show up unexpectedly.
Yeah, it's not easy. It is not easy, but at least controlling everything you can within your own company to avoid creating in miniature the same thing that's happening off the coast of California, of containers waiting, jockeying for a position for a limited number of spots. Ideally, if things are running smoothly on your end, you'll be able to schedule things as best you can, knowing that there is a little bit of kind of noisiness to all of this. It's not, you can't control every element, but controlling everything that you can so that you're not stuck with your supply coming, your, widgets coming in, and you're trying to send your product out at the same time, because you don't want anybody having a idle while you're unloading or loading a container. It happens.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. So diversifying your revenue stream. So as is the case with suppliers upstream, reliance upon a single revenue stream, profitable though it may be, carries significant risk. And that's kind of the overarching theme of this, and being able to quantify risk. So as COVID has demonstrated, entire sales channels can be shut down due to external shocks. Anybody who's in sort of a public facing business has experienced this. So companies should be actively seeking out multiple pathways to their consumers, having those on hand, even if a new revenue stream is not as profitable, just knowing that it may carry lower risk and therefore be worth pursuing. So everything from direct to consumer sales, business to business, online retail, third-party distribution, and even international markets are all on the table for small businesses. We make sure that companies are aware of this all the time when we're working under the IBD program, saying, hey, international markets are out there. Of course, there are costs associated with that. There are lots and lots of good reasons to look to export markets, especially if you're trying to find additional revenue streams so that you're not concentrated in just one channel. So speaking of exports, Kathy, can you just go into a little bit more detail on how you've seen companies leverage foreign markets to spread out risk in this volatile, environment that we're in right now?
Well, I think there's some imbalance even through North America. You may end up with a customer in Toronto or Montreal that's having troubles right now. You might be able to help them out by exporting up there. So you have to be aware of opportunities, even in our own hemisphere. So I think a lot of companies I've heard are managing it that way. They may actually get the product in that they need and have some excess product that they can export, or find other sources on the continent here. So there's a lot of shifting, but you have to be aware where the market is. And it could be right in our back door in Canada or Mexico.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Just knowing that all the pain that you're feeling, other people at different steps in the supply chain are feeling it too. And you may be able to provide a solution to people because they also can't find ships to source their products from further flung markets. So absolutely, that's something to just be aware of. And again, the IBD program is always here to help investigate that with you. Next slide, please. All right, so now finally, self-evaluation category. We're going to be talking about ecosystem awareness first. So supply chains are by their nature interconnected. So companies should think about their processes holistically. How well things operate depends on each link in the supply chain, the transitions from one link to the next, and how that chain fits in among others in the sort of general trade environment or the general supply chain environment. So achieving that kind of deep insight can take time. And it's definitely worth investing in within your company, just having somebody whose role it is to just keep on top of current issues. At the same time, there are individuals like Kathy who have dedicated their careers to making supply chains run smoother. So companies can look for options to leverage expertise of others operating in the same space to just be better aware of what's happening in the sort of supply chain within their field. So that could be supplier partnerships, trade coalitions, third-party logistics firms, what have you. Companies can draw on outside expertise to improve the functioning of their supply chain and keep on top of changing conditions. Again, you can do all of the sort of modeling that you want, but unless it's responsive to what's actually happening in the world right now, it's not really going to provide many solutions or help you find answers to disruptions that arise. So, Kathy, I know we've touched a little bit on this, but can you share a few more examples of the kinds of fast-moving conditions that experts such as yourself might be tracking?
I think right now you could get by and maybe in the old days without not being up on what's going on internationally, just on you're always concerned about your own situation, but now you have to look at it globally. So I think even though it's a bit of doom and gloom, I think that this was something that we had to talk about, how bad things are right now. Mm-hmm. But there is a silver lining. As things get better over the next year, there's more opportunities for companies to make better profits and so forth if we can get through this next 12 months together. But I think being aware of what's going on is most important right now, just as you said, Chris.
Yeah. Absolutely. Everybody that's going through this right now is going to be so adaptive and so resilient coming through this that hopefully when things improve, it'll just make the company that much stronger. So next slide, please. Continuous improvement. Again, this might seem somewhat intuitive, but it's important to say because a lot of companies do neglect this. I've said it once already, no supply chain should ever be set in stone. Conditions are fluid, so businesses have to ensure that their plans to secure critical inputs are timely and responsive. So assessing the options that are out there by defined risk categories can help to optimize supply chains and safeguard them in times of disruption. Even when a supply chain is functioning well, business should be actively developing backup supplier paths, shipping routes, testing them to confirm their viability, and actually have a plan in place within the company to review this, whether it's quarterly, whatever, on a regular basis, having a team in place whose job it is to assess the functioning of the supply chain and look for marginal improvements that are going to respond to the new conditions. You can track this on a daily basis, maybe get lost in this, just the amount of kind of minute shifts that happen all the time. But having a process internally just to go through the supply chain and understand how it's working, how it's functioning, and where there might be issues is going to make it so that you're not forced to make some drastic change over time. These incremental shifts, incremental refinements are going to really help a company when something big does happen. So, Kathy, I know that this is the same kind of refinement process that freight forwarders do, right?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I mean, there are a lot of different sourcing possibilities getting away from China. Companies are looking at Malaysia, Vietnam, places like that. But then when they come to me, the problem with Malaysia and Vietnam is not the production of the product, it's they're not set up with as many shipping routes out of there. not as many shipping lines call Vietnam and Malaysia as they do China. So you end up with another jam at the different ports there. The product is made quickly and very well, but then the problem becomes getting it back to Europe or the US or to South America, wherever it's going. So this is where having a good 3PL or a freight forwarder can help you with that type of thing. You don't want to change your production too quickly to another country without checking to make sure that you can move it out of that particular country.
Yeah. So knowing the conditions, being able to weigh all of the various factors and decide if there's a tipping point where new shipping routes open up between this, all of a sudden that sourcing might be viable, and being able to shift to a new area or, open a new supplier, whatever that might be, deciding when to make shifts is just as important as actually making the shift itself. So thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so we're sort of wrapping up the sort of content of this, and I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. So we've covered a lot here. First of all, the most important thing is don't let this overwhelm you. There are people who can help on this front. Everybody is going through this right now. You're not alone on this. Just thinking about it, being here, thinking about supply chains means that you're able to address these issues more quickly than people who aren't actively thinking about it. Supply chain resilience is a process. It's not a yes/no test. You're not suddenly, have a resilient supply chain and you can say, okay, I'm done. That's not how this works. It's something that you're just always constantly doing. It's important to think critically about your supply chains, even and especially when they work well. So relying on autopilot, as we said, only works for so long. And again, no company ever gets things entirely right, but finding small ways to improve can make you stand out from the competition, especially now. You don't have to get it perfect. You just need to sort of be operating more efficiently than others, and just weather these tough times so that you're able to kind of emerge and come out better on the other end. And next slide, please. And that's it. So thank you for your time and attention today. If you need any assistance with international trade issues, the Virginia SBDC International Business Development Program is here to help. The program website is down there at the bottom. I have listed my email as well. If you need anything like on the international trade front, please feel to reach out. But for now, I wanted to leave some time for any questions that Kathy and I might be able to answer.
All right, thank you so much, guys, Kathy and Chris. That was excellent. We don't have questions at the moment, but I'm thinking that probably there are some floating out there. So meanwhile, Chris, are you free to meet with people to discuss what we discussed today?
Yes, people can absolutely reach out. Anything in the international trade arena, we are here to support. Again, my email is right there. We are always happy to have a conversation about trade issues, and if there are other resources that we can plug people into, we're always happy to do that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, the SBDC, we have plenty of resources. Chris is one of our very knowledgeable resources, so please take advantage of that available to you guys. I think that maybe you guys covered everything. If you, oh, I have one that just came in. See, that's why I give it a little time. All right, let's see. Any sense of how quickly warehousing space will be added in Virginia and around the country? Everyone is looking for it right now.
I wish I could answer that, because I'm hearing that in New York, they're at the breaking point in the New York area. I know that. And also on the West Coast. But I have not heard anything about how quickly it's going to be added at this point. And yeah. It's rough right now.
It is true. It is just another pinch point, and some of this is just cascading for sure. There's when one kind of slowdown causes slowdowns or capacity issues all the way through. We try to make sure that we raise these concerns every chance that we get.
Yeah, I'll see. I'll reach out to some people I know and see if they heard anything. I cannot answer that myself, but I could find the answer from some people in the business right now. So I'll check it out.
All right. Well, if you all have questions, if you think of questions and we didn't get a chance to answer them, please send us an email, contact Chris, reach out, use the resources that we've got available to you. Everyone, you will receive a link to the recording and evaluation and to the slides. So you will have everything in your email there. If you'd like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, you can visit us, virginiasbdc.org/training. You can also go to the alexandriasbdc.org site, and you will find recorded webinars there and sign up for their upcoming webinars as well. Like I said in the beginning, we've got a couple more in this series, so keep an eye out for those coming out. And then we also have for Alexandria EVA registration and SWAM certification, July 16th, July 23rd. So lots of great stuff coming up with the Alexandria Small Business Development Center. Also on our website, you can access the COVID Recovery Center, which we developed to help owners not only continue business operations, but to thrive and recover. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. And you can either go to our website, or if you are just looking to get some questions to sign up for counseling, you can email us help@virginiasbdc.org. Thank you again, Chris and Kathy, for all of your time that you spent on this, for going through all of the details. And thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see everyone at the next session.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.